Hello again. There was a time when the Wellcome Collection in London, which is not far from Euston Station, was one of the best museums for investigating the history of medicine. It had a display which pretty well covered the whole of the history of Western medicine. You know, the field of study which has eradicated smallpox, extended the lifespan of almost everybody on the planet, and so on. That Western medicine. The exhibition had mock-ups of operating theatres, fascinating displays going back centuries. Families used to take their kids there at the weekend, and the kids were always absolutely entranced by the stuff on display. They used to run a lot of workshops for children too, including things like extracting DNA and a host of other exciting educational activities. That's all finished now. Melanie Keane, who has an art background, is the director. And she decided to sling out all that stuff on the grounds that it was ableist, sexist, and racist. In a tweet, at about the time that she made this decision and announced it, the Wellcome said, "What's the point of museums?" In a description to this video, I give a link to that particular dreadful tweet. She wanted to take the museum in an exciting new direction, and since destroying one of the most informative museum displays in the whole of London, she has invited a fellow artist to set up shop in the museum. This is a shaman or witch doctor called Grace Endiritu, who is African. She may be seen in the thumbnail to this video, and in the description I give a link to her Wikipedia page. When I describe her as a witch doctor, this is not meant at all in a pejorative way, because she has trained in Southeast Asia as a shaman, and some shamans in that area are actually self-described witch doctors, so I don't think there's any harm or anything offensive about using that term. She does actually claim to be a shaman. We'll stick to the term shaman, which is what she actually calls herself. This woman has set up what is described as a healing pavilion in the Wellcome Collection, using some of the wood panels from the original museum display. Visitors are invited to take off their shoes, for some unknown reason, and walk around and look at two enlarged photographs of museum staff from 1973 and 1915. Here we are. There's nothing particularly special about these photographs. That's the one in 1973 at a museum in Berlin. And there are signs telling people that if they get distressed at the sight of these displays, because of the racism and colonialism and so on, then they ought to seek the help of staff for counselling and so on. This all sounds to me quite mad and not nearly as educative as the museum displays, which were trashed to provide space for this nonsense. But it gets worse, much worse. This is a mad woman, and I use the expression deliberately and advisedly, and not in any sense of trying to insult her. She thinks that inanimate objects are conscious, and she disapproves of museums entirely. Let me read what this person says about the British Museum. Where are we now? If you visit the ancient Egyptian galleries at the British Museum in London on any given day, you may not realise that the objects on display are unhappy. They no longer feel special, but objectified in the true sense of the word, because of the cultural and energetic violation that has been enacted upon them through being exposed to endless photographs of tourists and other museum visitors. These objects were never meant to be seen by a single ray of sunlight or looked at by millions of keen museum goers. Hence, they feel like they are being robbed of their agency with no rights of their own. As such, they want to be free. How do I know about this? I have listened to objects by accessing different states of the mind and consciousness in 35 years of artistic and spiritual practice. The spiritual practice to which he refers is shamanism. Right, it isn't just the objects at the British Museum that are depressed and angry. There are totem poles at the Musée de Quai Branly in Paris are now equally fed up. They want to stand tall outside, feeling the sun on their surfaces, allowing rain to penetrate them and to fulfill the purposes for which they were created. They want their lives and their souls back. And how am I aware of this? By asking the objects themselves. Yes, this is a woman who actually talks to totem poles and receives answers from them. Perhaps viewers will now understand why I describe her as a witch doctor and shaman. It was for this that one of the best collections in Britain relating to medicine was dismantled and disposed of, which is a scandal. What it means is that this museum has now abandoned a commitment to science and rationality and is embracing shamanism. A few years ago, the bookshop at the Wellcome was one of the best in London for its selection of books relating to science and medicine. Now one sees Susan Sontag and various stuff on mindfulness and spirituality. The scientific section has shrunk to almost nothing. Still, they do seem to have plenty of money there for the really important things, the things that matter. Like what? Well, they have advertised this week for a diversity, equality and inclusion director at a starting salary of $211,000 a year. Yes, you did hear that right. The Prime Minister of this country earns £164,080 a year, and yet this new Director of Diversity and Inclusion is worth £47,000 a year more than that. Mind, the qualities needed for the post are quite demanding, I suppose. They want a thoughtful, collaborative and agile individual. I don't know whether they mean mentally agile or physically agile or what there. To set, evolve and implement an ambitious, multifaceted equity, diversity and inclusion strategy. Well, that's got to be worth a couple of $100,000 a year, surely. A concerted war is being waged upon our museums, and the Wellcome Collection is in the front line. Once existing displays and collections have been disposed of, they will never be replaced. If anybody had told me 10 years ago that the Wellcome Collection would be chucking out its exhibition and replacing it with a healing pavilion run by a shaman, I would have laughed. It's not really very funny, though, when you see your history being destroyed in this way in front of your very eyes.